you want to know
circular.
Like why is the serpent Satan, right?
Right.
Yeah. So why is the serpent Satan? I want to frame it in a question for half a second. If I had said the seraph was more crafty than any beast of the field, would we be arguing about this?
If that had been the term that was used in the original Hebrew?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The seraphim was more crafty than any beast of the field which Yahweh had made.
It would probably be an easier argument to make.
Yeah, it would hardly be a discussion, I think. By and large, everybody would be like, oh, like,
all right, angel of some kind.
Sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be some sort of angel. Welcome back to Curious Christianity. Today I am with Pastor Ryan, and we are going to run through some of my latest ideas on Genesis 3. All right, so in this particular case, I want to focus on the curses section.
Dun, dun, dun. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. Genesis 3, 14 through 19.
Mm-hmm.
So, what does it mean, Ryan?
What does it mean, Marty? I just went to Back to the Future.
That's a
so
good
what
one.
Is it? Yeah. So what does it mean? I think from my perspective, it's a lot of it is going to deal with how, just like you say, the presuppositions and the biases you bring to the text. And people bring very different biases. In our last conversation, I mentioned the early church father Irenaeus. When Irenaeus approached Genesis chapters 2 and 3, he did not believe they were history. He believed that they were a moral tale, a symbolic tale. He did not think Adam was a historical person. Eve was a historical person. That is one view that sometimes people bring to the text, and that's going to influence how you read the curses section. Similarly, there are people who think it is extremely historical. This is shot by shot. Someone is sitting there with a tablet and a stylus writing all this down, and this is exactly what went down. That there was a talking snake, that there is fruit that gives you knowledge. So a lot of that comes into it. And the two major theories that I've heard, and I don't know if this will incorporate to Adam's theory or not, but when I've done study on Genesis 3, one of two theories usually emerges. The first theory says that this is history, and therefore this was God's punishment towards Ha'adam, Ha'isha, and I forget the word for serpent in Hebrew. But was it Na'ash?
Nahash.
Yeah. Nahash. That's what it is. So they look at this and say, look, Adam sinned. This is the punishment. I'm going to punish him beyond just death. I'm going to make it hard for him to work the earth. The earth, which produced vegetation for him easily, is now going to be thorny and hard. Eve is going to have pain in childbirth. That wasn't the original plan, but that's what we're going to do. Some scholars, when they read that, they believe it's not just childbirth, but child rearing. They talk about how raising the child is going to be difficult for Eve, and that would have been a lot easier if they hadn't sinned, and that the serpent is going to be crushed underfoot. And then another matter that comes into it, if this is history, then the interpreter needs to decide if the serpent is Nahash, if that is Satan or not. Is that the devil, or is that another trickster being of some kind? If it's the devil, then when it speaks about the sun will crush the serpent's head, that is a prophecy about the coming of Jesus Christ coming to crush the devil. So that's sort of one theory. The other theory, which the way it was initially presented to me was kind of pedantic and condescending, and I didn't like that very much. But it was the way they were talking. They were like, "Oh, these poor Neanderthals." The guy who was writing down Genesis, whether it was Moses or another author or series of authors, whoever wrote down Genesis chapter 3 was trying to give a mythological explanation for various phenomena in the world that did not seem to connect to God creating a good creation. So how do you explain that agriculture is so difficult? It was a curse. why do women have pain in childbirth? If God's a good God, why wouldn't he make, like, why is this the biological equivalent of the Aliens franchise where a child bursts forth from the woman and it's incredibly painful? Why not just make it a much more peaceful situation? Why do people hate snakes? And obviously the serpent was a major Near Eastern symbol, not only in Judaism, but also in a lot of pagan mythology, Egyptian mythology, Greek mythology. Serpent even transferred over to Norse mythology. It's the if you go back to the Babylonian Enuma Elish, Tiamat is the serpent who symbolizes chaos in the beginning. They're trying to track, why do people hate snakes? And so is this idea that these cavemen were trying to look phenomenologically at the world and provide an explanation. I don't like how patronizing that theory is, because I think ancients were a lot brighter than we give them credit. They figured out how to make the Great Pyramids, and it took us centuries of scientific study to finally figure out how they did it. They figured it out long before we did with all of our brilliance and tools, and it wasn't that long ago that we thought that rain brought worms down from the sky and that baby mice were born from moldy cheese, and we're not as bright as we think we are. The ancients were pretty smart. So those are the major theories that I've heard about it. What is the significance of the curses? It's God's punishment for sin, or it's an explanation of natural phenomena. So those are the two major theories that I heard. Within the context of the story itself, I am one of those people that says insufficient data. I can read this and I can see the argument that it is history. I can read this, I can see the argument that this could be allegory. But for me, the punchline remains the same. If it is history, the punchline is the same as if it's allegory. I just don't have sufficient data to articulate which one it is. So I try to keep an open mind, but I do believe that the significance that in the infancy of creation, humanity sinned against God, that is historical. What was the talking snake a symbol, or was it literal? That's something that we can discuss. But yeah, that's kind of where it leaves me. One of the things that so this is my kooky theory. I'll throw my kooky theory at you first, then you can start throwing kooky theories at me.
I would love to hear it. And you did a great job kind of like setting up all of that. That was like really good. So
thank you. So the one kooky theory and that was off the cuff. There's probably more. There's obviously more to it than that.
It's a really good summary though.
Thank you. The one kooky theory I have is, and again, I can't prove it. I was writing a sermon on it earlier this year, and I was like, oh man, I never thought of it this way. So when I was younger, I was much more on the board for this must be a moral tale. It must be an allegory. It can't be history. I was more in that camp than I am now. And the reason why I said that is snakes don't talk. Trees don't grant magic powers, like those kinds of things. But here's a thought that I had. What did the serpent promise to Adam and the woman? And for listeners at home, I am specifically choosing to say Adam and the woman, not for misogyny or anything, but because she is not given a name until the end of the narrative. And I'm not sure if Adam's going to touch on that or not, but there are some people who have invested some theology and philosophy into why that is. So if you hear me say Adam and the woman, I'm trying to follow what the Hebrew says, what the text says. But what did the serpent promise to Chaisha, to the woman? What did he promise?
He promises that your eyes will be opened.
And you will
be like God.
You will be like God, because this is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Okay. Did Adam and Eve already know what good was?
Yes.
Because they were in relationship with God.
Yes.
They know what good is. So what is the only thing they didn't know? Evil. That tree could be an apple tree. There could be no significance to the power other than the experience of rebelling against God. The very experience that I've seized fruit, and now I know what evil is because I just did it. I bite into the fruit. It's just fruit. It's just fruit, man. but I learned what evil is and shame and guilt because I disobeyed the living God. I chose evil. I find that to be a kooky theory, but an interesting one. What
Oh,
if it's just the action? It's not the fruit that grants the knowledge.
no, I absolutely believe that's what it is. 100%. So I don't think it's kooky at all. And you should continue to preach that. And I'm serious. Like lots of time and effort towards that. Totally
Right.
think that's correct.
Right.
And again, I am saying that in a very significant sense, not just like, oh, that's like some kind of nice idea that we created. But no, I do think that is what the text is saying.
Right.
In and of itself. And I think that's very, very important that we are trying to get at what is the text saying? Not just like, I see some cool allegories here, which I do think, like, for example, I think Jordan Peterson does make some excellent observations. Just excellent. Some of them I just don't, it's not what the text is saying.
Correct.
But there are some truisms where it's like, yeah, that does mesh with human.
There's interpretation in there coming from outside of scripture, but the connection isn't illogical. Yeah. And one of the points that becomes important in my perspective, and one of the reasons why I say it's a kooky theory, but it's another connection I'm making. Lately, I've been doing some study in 1 Timothy and Ephesians as it connects to the ancient heresy of Gnosticism and how that played into the church that Timothy was serving at. And it's a lot of interesting connections there. But one of the things that I heard the ancient Gnostics say, and I hear people today say, I even hear it among Satanists, which the more I study Gnosticism, the more I'm convinced it's a branch of Satanism, whether they realized it or not, because they're venerating the serpent. But they venerate the serpent as the giver of knowledge, and you are saved by gnosis. You are saved by knowledge, right? Greek word, gnosis, knowledge, which is why we call someone who doesn't have certain knowledge of God an agnostic, right? So they believe that the serpent enlightened humanity and made them better through this action, and they liberated them from the evil God who would keep them in ignorance. This is not what God was doing. God was not keeping them in ignorance. God knew. It's like me saying, I want to prevent my child from knowing the horrors of war. You can learn the horrors of war by going through it. And yes, you will have knowledge you didn't have before. It's not knowledge you need, and it's not knowledge I want you to have. You don't need to have firsthand knowledge of evil. You have good. You have the only thing that you want. You are pure. You are protected. This is not a matter of enlightenment. This is a matter of corruption and nightmares. You are introducing something toxic into the person that's not going to provide them any benefit. It's not going to help them to discern good from evil. It's just going to help them know firsthand why evil is problematic. You could just look at a situation and say, this is what God would do. That's what I should do. That's all you need to know. It's not inhibiting, it's life-giving and death-preventing. So anyway, that's why for me, it's an apologetic against Satanism and this whole idea that the serpent was a good influence. He wasn't. So anyway.
I find it so mind-blowing that so many more people, I just listened to a podcast the other day where, the other guy was more intrigued and talking about the notion that the serpent was right. It's God who was the liar. It was God who was the deceiver. And so many people are making that point. The serpent was the correct one. And I just find this to be crazy.
So it's first question I want to ask you on that point, because I don't have I have an inkling of an answer, but I don't feel convicted by the answer yet. Why do you think people are attracted to that? Why do you think they're attracted to that conclusion? The Jar Jar Binks conclusion. You know what I mean? Like Jar Jar Binks was a bad guy all along, and he helped infiltrate the Sith into the Star Wars universe. Like there's a fan theory that he was a bad guy all along. Why when that's so obviously not the intention of the author to paint them in a good light? Why are people gravitated towards rooting for the bad guy and trying to make an angel out of a demon?
It'd be difficult to pinpoint exactly the reason for all different parties. But hands down, I do feel like it's really been the demonic spirit that
Mm,
bucks against authority.
yeah.
Like it bucks against authority, and it wants to go. It's like, you know what? You're right. Authority was unjust. Authority does want to just keep me down. They want to keep me from what I want to do. And the one who sets me free, they are the ones who is really the good ones. But the truth is, real freedom exists inside of laws. And the lawbreaker is the one who is actually restricting and stealing your freedom. And so it just doesn't surprise me in a world that is becoming more and more anti-authoritarian. They're pushing back against these notions, which is also why, on a slightly different level, why I think you see a polar opposite. There's becoming a greater polarization where what one side they're going anarchist and
Yep.
all this other stuff, but then what's the other alternative?
Fascism.
Full fascism,
Authoritarian.
communism, Islam, right? Because
Yeah.
that's one of the other questions that some people have asked. Why are women going to Islam? Like they're actively headed towards Islam. And part of the reason is because Islam is taking a firm stance and saying, this is how it is. Here
Right.
are the rules.
Right.
And the reason I believe that is because they're looking for security.
Yep.
The world is going crazy. And in this world of unbelievable amounts of information, people have never felt more insecure. So it's the same reason I've seen other people have been leaving Protestantism for Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy, because they come and they say, we have the truth. Not only do we have the Bible, but we have the infallible interpretations and interpreters of the Bible. And so all of you Protestants out there, you don't have the truth because you cannot infallibly interpret the Bible. So how can you really have all of the good essence and all those things? So that's a whole long way of saying that I think that is one of the reasons that is really, really drawing attraction to it. But I think, to be honest, they're deceived exactly like Eve is. And that's the whole point. So here's the part that I thought was really fascinating to me, and I'd never connected it before. But right, Eve sees the tree. It's good for food. It's a delight to the eyes. And the tree was desirable to make one wise. And it made me think about the other verse in Proverbs. For the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Right? And so what happens when she eats the tree? Does she actually become more wise? And the answer is no. She doesn't become more wise when she eats the fruit. See, the other verses in the New Testament tell us as well, right? For seeking to be wise, they became fools.
Right. Romans, right? Romans 1.
Yeah. Yep. And that's actually more so what I think really happens is that she doesn't become wise from eating the fruit. Her eyes are opened, and exactly like you said, which is all the great observations, that what did she actually learn?
Knowledge.
And the only knowledge that she gained was the experience.
Yeah.
She doesn't actually gain any intellectual knowledge. So I completely agree with what you were saying earlier. Now, one of the other aspects that I think is truly fascinating is the notion that I very much believe Adam and Eve were always made to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
I've heard that argument
Right?
too. Yeah.
So one of my buddies, he put it this way. He said, they were meant to when they had become mature.
Mm-hmm.
The notion was not that the tree wasn't meant for them and that it wasn't good for food, but that it wasn't the time for them. Only after they matured and had gone kind of through the process, then they would have been bestowed with the tree and it would have been good. But since they ate from it before they were supposed to, then they would know the good and the evil, but only be stuck in the evil. But had they waited, they would have known the good and the evil and been able to constantly stay in the good. So it is their sin that got them stuck in the wickedness and evil. But had they waited and matured, they would have been able to stay in the good. And this is actually, to me, very analogous to what we see with the temptation of Christ. When Satan
Okay,
comes to
talk to me
tempt
about that.
Christ,
Yeah.
when Satan comes to tempt Christ in the wilderness, he doesn't tempt him with anything that he would not receive. The only thing that he tempts him with is, you can have it now. Because would Christ not have bread again? No. In fact, he has bread immediately after the temptation is over.
Correct.
And then Satan tempts him with the kingdoms of the world. Is Christ not set to inherit the kingdoms of the world? He is. Not yet. Not yet. He has to finish his mission. And will
And
Christ not be...
if he does it the devil way, he doesn't have to go to the cross. Is part of the temptation, right?
That's right.
I'll give you a shortcut.
I'll give you a shortcut.
Right.
And then the final one, would Christ not be lifted up and exalted by the angels? He would be, but not yet. And so all of the temptations of Satan were not offering him something that God was not going to give him. The only temptation was when.
Right.
Will you take the shortcut? And I feel like this is very much analogous with our own temptations.
Right.
That most of the things that we're tempted by, it's not that God won't give them to us. It's not that we won't receive these wonderful gifts. It's that you need to wait for it. And so that's part of what I think is going on here. And I think it's very important to recognize one of the other questions, and this one actually wasn't even part of my original plan to talk with you. So you're getting some of the additional research behind the scenes. But it's the question of, why the tree anyway? Why the tree? This question comes up all of the time.
Right. Why bother putting the tree there if it's just going to cause them to stumble? Right.
Yeah. Well, what's the tree for? And I think that it does have a very significant purpose. And the purpose is, Adam and Eve are born immature.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's not that they're born sinful and all those things. They're born immature.
Right.
Part of the process of maturity are trials.
Mm-hmm.
It is for the purpose of their growth and development. And it doesn't entail that they sin to grow and develop, but it does entail that they have to be forced with choices and making choices.
So here's a question for you, and it's going to make Catholics fist pump the air angrily and the Greek Orthodox chant your name. But Adam and Eve, were they children or adults?
I lean towards the idea of adults.
Okay.
I don't really feel like there's any...
The Catholics then will be happy, and the Orthodox will be like, you were so close, man, just say it. Because they hold to the idea very much, it is what you're talking about. And actually, if you go back to, I mentioned Irenaeus before, he believed not that, now again, we talked about original sin in the previous podcast, but his view on original sin was that Adam and Eve were not, the original sin did not transfer the way that Augustine said it would have. It's just that people were born into a broken system, closer to what Wesleyans believe. But he believed that essentially they were immature, and that was their problem in the garden. They needed time to mature. I find it interesting. I don't know if you know this offhand. This is so. I haven't been published yet, but I have tried to write a book, and this is one of the topics I talk about. And we talk about, why was the tree even in the garden? That's in one of my chapters. And you live in India. Hey, Adam, what happens if you eat an immature likey fruit, which comes from India?
I haven't had to do that, but I do hear, I think it's poisonous, right?
Yeah, it can cause it can cause all kinds of issues, fevers, tremors. It can actually, if you have a weak enough constitution, it can kill you. So this is not the only fruit that wasn't ready on the branch. If you eat it too soon, it's toxic. If you let it mature, you're fine. And I feel like that metaphor carries into Genesis 3 with kind of what you're saying. So if someone were to push back on you and ask the question, okay, so you're saying they're immature, does that generate from the text itself? Or are you reading that into the text? How would you respond?
Yeah, so I think that it does generate a little bit. Now, of course, so there's a key hermeneutical element that needs to be played here. And it's very key and it's very important. And this one I will argue about, but I can understand if others don't accept it. And that is that when you read Genesis from 1 all the way through the end of the book of Genesis. Now I know that you can talk about a divide between 1 and 11 and then 12 and
1 to 11 and 12 to the end because of the patriarchs. Yeah.
I get that. That's fine. But regardless, this principle I believe still holds, and that is that there's a significant difference in how you interpret and read the New Testament and the book of Genesis.
Okay.
Most of Genesis, it teaches through the narrative. And what that means is you are meant to read the story and understand from what happens in the story. That is how it is communicating. There is not a narrator telling you this was good, this was bad, this was good, this was bad.
Judah slept with a woman he thought was a prostitute, and it was a bad idea. And it was a bad idea is never in the text. You're meant to draw that out from reading it. This was a bad idea. Polygamy with Jacob and his wives was probably a bad idea. And I think a lot of the Old Testament plays out that way. I mean, not the wisdom literature, obviously, but Esther, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, you're kind of meant to draw the lesson out yourself.
Well, and Jacob and Esau is one of the classic ones that I appeal to for this, as one other solid example is the notion of the question I always had was, does Jacob get away with it? And like this question just bothered me and bugged me.
Yeah.
Because I was just like, I felt like he gets away with it. I was like, dude, this dude's like such a scumbag, comes in there, lies to his dad, steals his brother's birthright, and just nothing.
But then he gets pimped out by his wife. Like the whole line about the mandrakes, you remember that? Like his wife says, "Here, give me some mandrakes so that I can sleep with our husband tonight." Like literally, he's getting passed around like a bit of a prostitute. Like, I don't want to say he got away with it. And then later on, when his kids are, Reuben and Simeon or Simeon and Levi who go and slaughter the whole village that harmed their sister. And he says, "You have made me odious in the nose of the surrounding nation." Like, he deals with consequences. His heart gets broken when Joseph gets killed. He deals with consequences. I don't think he gets away with it.
So I actually think the text is more explicit in showing why and how he doesn't. So the first example is immediately after that when he goes to Laban, right?
Mm-hmm. Laban tricks him back.
Yeah, but the way that he tricks him is what's telling. Because he went in and tricked his father by bringing the younger son when his father was expecting the older.
Right.
And his father couldn't tell because he couldn't see anymore.
Right.
But now Laban tricks him by bringing the older when he was expecting the younger because Jacob couldn't see her either.
Right.
Instead, she wore a veil. And so the same imagery and how he's tricked, how he's deceived is, I think, very, very strong.
That's powerful.
And then the further parts is that how else did he trick his father? He tricked his father with a goat's skin. And he tricked him with goat meat. And then when you see Joseph being locked up, thrown away, they trick his father with the coat, which would have covered Joseph's body. And the text explicitly says, and they sprinkled goat's blood on the jacket. And so he's fooled by a goat and the goat skin, and that whole idea. And so I think that this is extremely telling and calls us back to that. So anyway, all of that
back to Genesis 3. Yeah.
Back to Genesis 3. That was a long way of explaining, but it's very important because there are many scholars, as I've read like their writings, their complaint is like, well, it doesn't say that. And I'm kind of like, I don't care. Like, I really don't care. That doesn't make any sense to me. Yeah, it doesn't say lots of things, but it's extremely suggestive. And the way that it's suggestive, one, that a few scholars have noted that they actually believe when it says they were naked, that is part of what it's expressing. It's expressing
the innocence of immaturity.
Their innocence, their immaturity, their lack of knowledge and understanding. And I think that is, there's some pretty powerful imagery there to express that. But what I think actually makes it even stronger is that in Hebrew, so for example, we all quote Genesis 3:1. Now the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field.
Right.
Okay. Crafty, of course, crafty, subtle, all those things. They're kind of a strange word. And one of the things is that
in the opening chapters of Genesis, it's an older form of Hebrew, if I remember right. They're using some archaic terminology.
So one of the things, though, I would suggest that the correct word, in a sense, is wise. That what it's really saying is the serpent was more wise.
Shrewd.
So, but the reason, well, and so like anywhere else you look in the Old Testament and he uses this type of word, it's kind of has the positive connotation, like, oh yeah, knowledgeable, wise, that sort of thing.
Right.
The reason that it's chosen is because it's a word play between naked.
Yeah.
So there's a small word play in Hebrew between the word naked and crafty. And so you see those contrasted. And so it shows even more so that it's trying to show the difference between the nakedness of Adam and Eve and the craftiness of the serpent. So it's Arum and like Arun or something like that.
I was about to say, I'm going to see if I can pull up my Hebrew Bible here real quick. You keep going. Keep going.
Yeah. So that's one further reason why I feel like the text is very much saying that the immaturity and that notion is a part of the aspect. And further, I think that that's what it's also saying. When you see the serpent show up, then you're supposed to understand the serpent is more wise. He knows more than Adam and Eve. You know, he has a greater understanding, you know, and it's saying more than any of the beasts of the field. Yeah, obviously it's putting him above the beasts of the field, but I also think it's putting him above Adam and Eve. And that's just part of the major narrative of the story. So, and
then some people who are going to take, so people are going to ask the question, Adam, are you taking a strong historical view or an allegorical view here? Because I mean, is Nahash Satan or is he not?
Yeah. This is definitely a really important part. There's something I want to emphasize.
Arom and Arum. Yeah, those are the two Hebrew words. Arom and Arum. Arom means naked. Arum means crafty or wise, shrewd.
Yeah, which is why I think that word was chosen largely because it shows the contrast.
In Genesis, he likes to do the play on of words for sure.
Yeah, so what I want to say about Genesis 3, my major goal, now I am going to answer a little bit more about the historical part, but my major goal is to express what does it mean? What does the narrative mean? Because that's the part where I feel like it's really, really lost, is the meaning of the text. Now, I do lean much more towards the historical view for a series of reasons. One of those reasons is I do believe that this is Satan. There is no snake. He doesn't even come in the form of a snake, I don't think. But instead, the word here is chosen because it's actually describing him. He is a seraphim or cherubim in the garden.
Okay. Keep going. I feel like there's more coming.
Oh, there's plenty more coming.
Okay, hit me with it.
Yeah. Well, the first major part is number one, just to explain that. Because the biggest obstacle, there are a ton of Old Testament scholars. They're all saying it's just a snake.
They have no the argument that Old Testament scholars will make is that at this point in Jewish history, the author had no conception of a Satan, or as it says in the Hebrew, Chashaitan. Chashaitan is just a Hebrew word that means the adversary. It wasn't necessarily a proper name, even in the story of Job, it's not until you get to the monarchy or even afterwards. A lot of scholars want to argue that it was actually Israel's time in Persia that developed their doctrine of Chashaitan or a devil. And if you're not a Catholic, the name Lucifer never appears in the Bible. That is something that comes from outside the 66 books of the Old and New Testament that Protestants hold as authoritative. So even the proper name, all that, they would argue you don't get to a proper name until Jesus meets the devil in the wilderness in Matthew chapter 4. That's the first time you have a personal devil in the Bible, is the argument they want to make.
Yep, you are 100% correct. And a lot of the scholars all argue and fight with me for the reasons you just articulated. And yes, I absolutely think they are 100% wrong. They're wrong for various reasons, a whole bunch of different reasons.
Hit me with your strongest reason. Why do you think they're wrong? Strongest reason.
Well, the strongest reason is simply because the serpent is Satan. And
that's circular argument, Adam. The serpent is Satan, and Satan is a serpent. Yeah. And if you remember from the beginning of this statement, the Satan is serpent and serpent is Satan. That's
you want to know circular. Like, why is the serpent Satan, right?
Right.
Yeah. So why is the serpent Satan? I want to frame it in a question for half a second. If I had said the seraph was more crafty than any beast of the field, would we be arguing about this?
If that had been the term that was used in the original Hebrew?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The seraphim was more crafty than any beast of the field which Yahweh had made.
It would probably be an easier argument to make.
Yeah, it would hardly be a discussion, I think. By and large, everybody would be like, oh, like,
all right, angel of some kind. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be some sort of angel. So,
which I think is. It also, I mean, you start getting into Atrahasis and some of the other ancient myths that people point to and say that the Jews essentially stole their myth from other cultures and just changed it.
Yeah, but so this is where
the commonalities when people try to make that argument. And by the way, I want to go and yell at Bill Maher, who is a comedian who made the mockumentary Religulous, and he liked to say how Christians stole the entire biography of Jesus from pagan myth. That has actually been resolutely proven to be false since like the 2nd century AD. It's an old argument and it's a weak one. A lot of the commonalities, I actually went and I read the Enuma Elish and started on Atrahasis earlier this year. And when you read the old myths, everyone tells you there's so many commonalities. There's so many things that are so similar. You go and you read it and you go, okay, kind of like how the Big Apple is like an apple. Like they're not that similar. Like it's very minor. But people who want to start making those arguments saying it's allegory, I don't know how they get around snakes don't talk. They don't. Although I have heard some scholars try to argue that the serpent was possessed by the devil, that it was a snake, but the devil was in him, which again is reading into it, or it was the devil coming in the form of a snake, or there was no snake, or, all those different views. But
yeah. So number one, like I said, I think that by and large, if somebody had said the seraphim was more crafty than any beast of the field, everybody would be like, okay, well, yeah, it was an angelic being. Nobody would really fight or argue.
But they use the word Nahash, not Sheraphim. Yeah.
But so let me solve that for you.
I think I've heard, I'm having a tickle in the back of my brain. I think I've heard this before, and it's been a while. Yeah.
Okay. So I've never heard anybody else. So this is my own argument. So remember Numbers 21.
Yep.
So you've got the whole snake thing, right?
Opening
so
my Bible.
Up Numbers 21. Yeah.
This the bronze snake?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So let's go to like verse 8. We'll just skip through verse 8, not go through everything.
Make a nachash and put it up on a pole. Anyone who is bitten can look at it and live. So Moses made a bronze snake and put it up on a pole. Then when anyone was bitten by a snake and looked at the bronze snake, they lived.
Yeah, so in verse 8, it says, Then Yahweh said to Moses, make a seraph. It says, make a seraph. Serpent. And he set it on standard. And it will be that everyone who's bitten will live. So God says, make a seraph. And then Moses says, and Moses made a nahash. And he set it on a standard.
Mm-hmm.
The two terms are by and large,
somewhat
interchangeable.
interchangeable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Serpent or
Either
fiery
way.
serpent, a poisonous serpent, or it can be a majestic being with 6 wings, according to Strong's. Saral. And then it gets used in Isaiah 6 for seraphim. Yeah.
Yeah. So it gets a little further, but in essence, number one, the imagery is the same, which is more important in Hebrew. Now we're going to cheat just a little bit. I've got one little thing to add to this, which of course very much impacted me as well. All right. Can you see that?
Yeah. Yep. Oh yeah, that's is that Persian?
Nope. It's
No,
Hebrew.
Egyptian. Oh yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, no, so I can't point to it on mine. The text below the images is definitely Hebrew. I think the top stuff is an old form of Hebrew.
Yeah, it's Paleo Hebrew.
Paleo Hebrew. It says it right there. Just keep reading, Ryan. That helps. Yeah.
These are the depictions of the seraphim of Isaiah 6.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which oddly enough.
And they're serpentine.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So that was their idea of seraphim, were serpentine description. And so I think that very much the imagery, the description, what it's talking about is this idea of, a serpentine figure. So one of the arguments that I think is very strange from the other side is, my question to them is, why do you think it's a snake?
Mm-hmm.
Because it says the serpent, that's why you think it's a snake?
Mm-hmm.
That's it?
Well, I think they probably lean into ancient, and you're going beyond the text, but they're leaning into ancient Near Eastern cosmology. Because in ancient Near Eastern cosmology, like I mentioned with Tiamat, it is the ancient Near Eastern symbol of chaotic evil. That was the case in Babylon. That was the case in Egypt. That was the case in Assyria, Greece, Rome. I mean, even in Revelation, when you're depicting the Roman Empire or this future empire that's going to be evil, it's a dragon, which is a form of serpent. It has always been the symbol of chaotic evil. So they probably make that connection and say this must be what was within the mind of the author of Genesis.
That is a version that some people think. Yeah. Now, I want to answer a little bit of the question of, because everyone always just points to and says, well, we never see the serpent again. Mm-hmm. He's not mentioned or referenced again, and therefore they disconnect it from the rest
until the New Testament. Until the New Testament.
Yeah, exactly. Until the New Testament. Yeah. And for the reasons you cited earlier, they would just kind of write off the rest of it.
They have to write off the New Testament if they're going to make that argument. Yeah. Although the thing you also run into is you also have to ask the question as a good Christian and maybe a bad academic. As a good Christian, a bad academic. I mean, in the New Testament, there are instances where they go back to the Old Testament and say, King David said this, and he did not realize he was saying something that went beyond his own circumstance, that the Spirit was speaking through him and he was prophesying about the future, which might mean that just because the author of Genesis doesn't know something doesn't mean the Spirit isn't speaking through him. Also, the author of Genesis wasn't there for creation. The Spirit would have to be speaking through him somehow. You know what I mean? Like there would have to be some kind of revelation happening. Did God know?
For sure.
If God knew, then maybe the author of Genesis knew. Or he spoke without knowing.
So by and large, I'm going to avoid that line of reasoning.
Yeah, I know.
For now.
Yeah, it's not very academic.
Now. Yeah. Well, that, and I think that I can show enough evidence to the contrary, like not to the contrary of the New Testament, but that we can show it enough
of it. Independent of the New Testament. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for the I'm just going to avoid that subject for a moment.
Sure.
So there's a very old question.
Okay.
Why is the serpent in the garden?
Well, if he's a snake, like the argument wants to go, if he's a snake, he's in the garden because he's one of the creatures. He's why would there be a horse in the garden? Because God made horses. Why is there a giraffe in the garden? God made giraffes.
Well, like I said, I'm going to kind of push away the animal one. So like for the few reasons I gave so far, I think that I have even more arguments than that. But and that is one of the other things that I find very, very striking is that all the rest of the scholars agree as well. Animals don't talk. There's no history.
Well, I mean,
record.
that's pretty safe bet.
So,
unless it's a parrot or a crow, I'm probably going to think that someone's hidden a speaker somewhere.
Yeah. And so like, that's the other part where they all kind of punt after that. They're like, yeah, animals don't talk. Even in ancient history, there's not like a whole bunch of Aslan animal talking going on.
Balaam and his donkey, but they probably say that's a vision.
Well, and yeah, that's a whole nother subject where everyone as well still agrees that was a very special circumstance.
Yeah.
So for all of those reasons and more, I would say that the serpent is Satan.
Okay.
Why is Satan in the garden?
He snuck in.
See, I was
God didn't set up a good bouncer. They need it. It's not a gated community. Either that, or if Satan is in the garden, then this is the moment of his fall. It didn't happen before this. So he's in there doing his job and he screws up and he gets ejected too, I suppose would be the argument.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the correct view.
Logically, it would have to follow. Yeah.
And so why is he there? Because he's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
That's his job. And so like Ezekiel 28, I do think helps a little bit in this arena. I don't think you need it, but I think it helps. So if you go to verse 12, now I'll just read it for you if you don't mind.
Yeah. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom.
Yep. You are the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering, the ruby, topaz, diamond, beryl, all the jewels. You know, on the day you were created, they were prepared. You were the anointed cherub who covers, and I placed you there. You were on the holy mountain of God, which for reference should be thought of as the Garden of Eden. They're not really talking about different things.
Or
you walked in the midst of the stones of fire. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created. So here it is saying that, yeah, this cherub is blameless, right? Until unrighteousness was found in you. And so therefore I cast you as a profane from the mountain of God, and I have destroyed you, O covering cherub. Yeah, so he's there because he's supposed to be.
I'd have to look it up.
I'm gonna look something up real quick. Go ahead and
Okay. Yeah, so I think that is a very significant portion here, and it also explains why is Eve talking to it. The other question that always comes up is, why is Eve talking to a talking snake? Why isn't she scared?
You're saying that stranger danger, if they had just done the whole stranger danger thing, then maybe we wouldn't have had the fall.
Yeah.
Don't talk to strange snakes, kids.
Well, and this is the thing that, of course, many other college professors kind of mock Genesis 3 because they would like, it's this ridiculous story about a talking snake who does this and this. And I basically want to say it's not nearly as ridiculous, even on a practical historical reading, as most people have made it out to be. So the woman is talking because it's like, well, the serpent's always been there. And in fact, she may even trust him because after all, it's the garden cherub. Like, certainly he would know more than she does. He would have greater understanding than her. There's no reason you wouldn't trust him.
You know what's odd about Ezekiel 28? Sorry, this is something I just noticed that was bugging me.
Every precious stone adorned you: carnelian, chrysolite, and emerald, topaz, onyx, and jasper, lapis lazuli, turquoise, and beryl.
That's 9 stones. Those are 9 of the 12 stones in the high priest's breastplate. Why aren't all 12 of them there?
That's a whole nother subject.
I've never noticed that before.
Yeah, there actually is a discussion about that. Yeah, you're way ahead to catch that, but you'll see those stones show up in Revelation
Oh, sure.
well,
Yeah. The 12 gates and the 12 foundations and sure. But that
Yeah.
why didn't Ezekiel pick up on the fourth row? Like that. All right, I got something I got to be thinking about now. Anyway, back to Genesis 3.
So yeah, that's another great observation. I haven't gone back to kind of do a bunch more on that one. So if you actually do finish a study on that, because I saw some research on that where people were talking about that, but they did not
Inconclusive.
finish it. Yeah, it's just very inconclusive. Nobody could really solve it. I think to me, the major portion actually is that you should connect that with also Genesis 2. So Genesis 2 is talking about, and the land was full of gold and resin.
Oh, yeah. There's gold and Ophir. There's resin here. And okay.
Yeah. So that's part of the imagery. So,
your Old Testament scholars will push back on Ezekiel, and they'll say that is about the king of Babel or king of Tyre? Tyre. The king of Tyre is who that prophecy is about, not Satan.
Yeah. So there's a lot that could be said about that. So I don't want to spend too much more time on that one.
Sure. Sorry. You put me in Ezekiel, man. I'm a Wesleyan. I'm going to get excited about Ezekiel.
Well, each one of these things is, of course, super contested.
Yeah, there's a deep well to dive in each passage. So go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to derail.
No, you're good. You're good.
You got a Bible nerding.
Yeah. The main thing I would say about Ezekiel is that I think that Ezekiel is using the story of Genesis 3
to talk about the king of Tyre.
Yeah. And so my major contention here is this is how Ezekiel understands Genesis 3.
Mm-hmm.
Like, sure, I agree he's talking to the king of Tyre.
Sure.
But it's the same thing, like, you're a pastor, right?
Right.
Have you ever used the illustration of David to explain and make a point?
No, never.
We do this stuff.
We never talk about David. Hate David. No, I love David. Who's my dad's favorite Bible character to preach on. So yeah, no, totally.
So to me, the idea that a lot of people are like, oh no, this couldn't be. It's like, okay, like it couldn't be, except for it matches up here, and here. Like, it's like, let me get you 6 points of reference as to why this matches the Genesis 3 story.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, you guys are insane.
Academics have a habit of coming down really hard on what it can't be. They never come down on hard on what they think it is, but they like to come down hard on what it can't be. It can't be this, or this. Why? Even some of the arguments you read about, like New Testament authorship and stuff like that, where they say, "Oh, this must be." You're swinging for the fences from one verse. Good grief, you're jumping the gun. But anyway, so you make these connections and you identify. Yeah. Serpent, Nachash, seraphim, it's the same term or a similar term, a term used interchangeably in Numbers, where Moses has the bronze snake. Same imagery. You have the precious stones that connect with the lands that are described in Genesis 2. Ergo, your conclusion is?
My conclusion?
Yeah. What's the Mike Tyson punch at the end?
Oh my God. So
what will cause the fundamentalists around you to pick up rocks and get ready to stone you to death?
Yeah, so everything I've shared with you so far, this is all in the preface.
Right.
We haven't even actually touched Genesis 3:14, which is where
we haven't. I was like, remember you wanted to talk about curses?
Yeah. So this is just the necessary information to even get to the curses portion.
Okay.
Because if you think that the serpent is just a snake, okay, well, we're just not even talking about the same thing anymore.
Right.
And yeah, it's not going to have any of the theological significance, and you're not going to get at what the text is actually trying to communicate. Now, I just want to make one last thing about the preface point, and that's just to say that the temple imagery always seems to have, yes, this river flowing from it. You'll see the same river in Ezekiel, Revelation, correct. Isaiah. Mm-hmm. You're going to see the seraphim and cherubim, which incidentally I would say are the same thing. Some people will fight me over that, but I've got my own arguments for why that's true too. And so, yeah, you have all of these things. And again, like when you have 3 pieces of evidence, like that's a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I'm just like, yeah, forget about the scholars when they're like, oh, that can't be. And I'm like, okay, look, I've got 5 pieces of evidence. So I'm not really sure. Yeah, where we're going here. So now let's actually get to 3, 14, 15. All right. So really short. What's your thought on what 3:14 means then? This is where we start to get to the punches.
Right. Cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly and you'll eat dust all the days of your life. Obviously, the serpent isn't literally eating dust. It eats, if we're talking about a snake, it eats animals, right? It eats mice, it eats eggs, it eats. Cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. It seems like within the context, the apparent reading that I imagine you're going to push back against is that this is either a phenomenological explanation or pointing to the curse that the snake has to suffer and why we see snakes slithering around, sticking their tongue out to check temperature. It looks like they're licking up dust. This is a member of the livestock. This is one of the creatures of the livestock. Ergo, it's being cursed as the worst of the animals of the field, as it were.
Yeah, but let's go with the
obvious reading. Huh?
But let's go with the Satan view. Because like I said, I reject the animal view in its entirety. I don't even believe that Satan possessed a snake.
So cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. That would then say that you aren't, you go from this high position, this angelic being, which is second only to humanity. You're this high angelic being. You aren't even worth the rats that are scurrying around on the earth anymore. Like the fall is complete. Then you will crawl on your belly and eat dust. The implication there being that you will be in defeat. And that surely gets capitalized in verse 15, where it says, I'll put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head and you will strike his heel. That being a prophecy about the coming of Christ.
Yeah. So much more there. But I'm going to add a little bit more to the tail end of 14, which is going to be important for moving forward. But yeah, the first part I think is very much correct. And also why I think it's very, very significant that God actually curses the serpent, curses Satan, right? Which is further why I think that this is the fall of Satan. But yeah, I think exactly like you were saying earlier, it is the notion that in 3:1 is contrasting, you're up here and yeah, now you're down here.
Bottom of the totem pole.
Yeah. But the eat dust is really significant because I want
Are you gonna go with Adamach? Are you gonna go with humanity came from the dust of the earth, so he's gonna try and consume humanity? Because I had that thought come to my head too.
That's right. Read 3:19.
So in 3:19, for our listeners at home, by the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return. So the serpent eating dust would be trying to consume humanity, trying to eat God's kids.
Yep. That's exactly what it means. And so this is actually where you get the entailments of Satan's dominion, his domination, and his desire. And I think very much this is the kind of idea that Peter has in mind in 1 Peter 5:8, right? For the devil is a roaring lion
looking for someone to devour. Yeah.
So
and it also connects with Revelation when he's hunting after the pregnant woman giving birth to the son.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah,
so there's that. The imagery of him trying to consume is definitely there.
Yeah. So this is going to get a little deeper as we continue to go as well. But so like, for example, one of the questions that comes up, and it's one of those questions, commentators are very funny, where they will comment
like haha funny, Jerry Lewis funny. I need to read the commentaries you're reading. Sorry.
Where they will talk a lot about the things that they know and not much about the things they don't know, which is okay.
Right.
In some sense, I approve of this.
Not trying to speak from ignorance. Sure.
Bro, you missed over really significant portions. Like you're here to tell me what this verse means, and you skipped over large portions. So because in evangelicalism, many people accept the fact that this is a prophecy regarding the promised seed and defeating Satan. Right? That's widely held. But then my question is this. So who are the seeds of the serpent?
Between your offspring and hers, that would, in that verse where it says your offspring and hers, so the offspring of Satan, you could make the argument that demons, you can make the argument the other fallen angels, you can make the argument that it's those that succumb and are seduced by Satan and become his followers, like you see again in Revelation, when Paul, I forget which of his letters, he accuses some people being from a synagogue of Satan, that kind of thing. Jesus saying, "Your Abraham isn't your father; you're the sons of the devil."
Yeah. So textually, the answer is all that he devours.
Yeah.
Verse 14.
Yeah.
Right? All that the serpent devours, they become his children. So the enmity between the serpent and the woman, and then between her seed and his seed. The other question that nobody asks is, who's the father of the woman's children?
The implication here would be Adam.
Yeah, but I don't think that's what it's saying in the text.
You have to.
Because that's the assumption.
The assumption would be Adam. You'd have to, if you're now, I will say you're reading it allegorically. To read that somewhat, just in trying to. Somewhat. We're not talking about literal dust. We're talking about people.
Yes.
We're not talking about literal snakes.
Yeah.
Metaphor, allegory is just a metaphor with a moral. That's all it is. Allegory is just a metaphor with a moral. If we're and by the way, if someone writes an allegory, to read it literally is to read it as an allegory, not to read it as when Jesus says cut off your right hand, he's using hyperbole. He doesn't mean go get a chef's knife and get to cutting. This isn't.
We're gonna need a new word.
This isn't 127 hours. Yeah, literally. People even use it when they mean figuratively. Literally, I could die. You mean figuratively. Like, so, but the implication here would be, again, we would be shifting. It would be similar imagery to Revelation, which I think is by intent. And they'd be the sons of God, the children of God, the antithesis of the children of the devil. Would then be the implication. So Yahweh.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. Like, and I'm going to cheat a little bit to explain that because we're not going to get through all of this. Like, they're not even.
We might need an episode 2, and you can blame me. You can blame me. That's
No. We're doing really good. Well, like, I mean, I could talk to you for many hours on this.
Yeah.
So, but I'm going to skip a little bit, and one of the further reasons that you should believe this. And this one I'm not actually going to probably fully explain in this moment, but it's when you get to what God says to Adam, right? And then you skip to like 17 and 18. He's like, curses the ground because of you, and pain you'll eat of it. Now, another thing that's really interesting to note here is that it says, curses the ground because of you. In pain, you will eat it. It actually has the same language as what God says to the serpent. So it doesn't say that he'll eat dust, but it says he'll eat ground, because it doesn't have the preposition before the last part. So it's
the bait, bait isn't there. What verse is that? That's
so verse 17. 17b.
Vula Adam Amar Ki Shemaot Lekol Ish Tek. Cool. I'm not seeing a bait. Cursed be the ground because of you. You will. To kalnach, not bay. That's interesting. That'd be to akal or to kal and nach.
So you are charismatic, speaking in tongues.
No, I'm just reading. I'm just doing my very broken Hebrew. I'm trying to figure out why it's inflected with a tav. Interesting. Keep talking. I'm listening.
Yeah. So, and then obviously as well, like when you read it in Hebrew, it's so much more apparent the connection between the ground and Adam.
Yeah, because there's 3 words: the ground, the man, and his proper name, and it's Adomach, Adam, Ha Adam. And the way those, it's you get Adam out of Adamach, and that's why I like to say that Adam is a dirt bag. He's a bag of dirt. That's what he is. He's the dirt man. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
so
interesting.
then the text says, both thorns and thistles it shall grow for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. Now, of course, everyone's assumption is it's just talking about dirt, plants, and all that nonsense. Right. But who's supposed to be fruitful?
Humanity. Humanity and all the animals and all the fruits and vegetables. Everything is supposed to be fruitful and multiply.
Thorns and thistles is an idiom. It simply, by and large, means non-productive.
Yeah.
It has the idea that life does not come from it.
Yeah.
And so this actually has the connotation that Adam's seed will not produce life.
Vikots vidardar. Both thorns and interesting. So a seed will not produce life.
Which is
Are
why
you drawing a contrast of that with the seed of the woman?
Yeah, that's why the seed of the woman, or the husband, the one above it, it can't be Adam. Because you know what? Who is the biological father of the seed of the serpent? Adam.
Who is the biological father of the mother of the seed? Adam. Yeah. I mean, you follow the same genealogy.
I'm my own grandpa, so.
Yeah, you follow you follow the same genealogy though. You go to Matthew and Luke, it says that Jesus is the direct descendant of Adam, right? Luke chapter 3, Matthew chapter 1, if I remember right.
Yeah. So anyway, that's what's going on there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I can honestly say I haven't heard this before. This is a new one.
Oh,
your interpretation. Worry. It's a new one.
Yeah, I've got plenty more, but there's a reason why this is a very novel interpretation. So let's look at doing a part 2.
I think so.
I just want to touch on a couple other things, but for the most part, I'm going to have to wrap it up here.
Me too. It's 11 o'clock over here, and I haven't had dinner.
Yeah.
So